So, welcome. I am Andra Annette, and this is my co-host, the fabulous Nicky Cooper. So, in our real lives, we are both nurses, but we are also, she's a therapist, and I'm a nutritionist, or a holistic practitioner, however you want to say it, right? We come on here and we share our thoughts and talk about some of the things that we have experienced over the course of 75 years in practice, right? Yeah, wow, it's a long time. So, so what I wanted to talk about today is because you deal a lot with emotions and stuff like that. I want to give you that space and because I know you understand that as nurses, we read emotions like vital signs. Like people, it's really hard for us not to look at that piece. So, and I think a lot of people feel like, if they're angry and they say they let it go and they don't really that, it somehow disappears in the body, that it doesn't move, and it just really relocates, right? And it shows up as gut health issues and so much more, thyroid, autoimmune, but it shows up as sickness, depending
Mm,
on what's happening in their body. But there's that other piece, Nikki, when we have trauma, right? And people haven't expressed that trauma, and they haven't been able to get rid of those emotions that they're holding on for trauma. And I know you get this, that it does show up in other ways, because the body is still protecting them. So they are people pleasing, overworking, they become perfectionists and stuff like this. And it's still impacting them on a large scale unless they do work through that with someone or on their own, however they choose to do that. But that does need to leave the body. Your body stores the memories of our life, right? So, what are your thoughts on this?
oh gosh, you see it. I've seen it for so many years now, Andra. I've there's always such a an underlying aspect of every single person I've ever had contact with in the health profession, whether that's working alongside or working with as a patient or a client. And it's one of the, I think I've said this to you before, I used to see some massive familiarities in the link between our emotional being and our physical being, which was stress bunnies. I used to call them stress bunnies whenever
Mm,
I did cardiology. And so I would often, you get to kind of know people really well. You know what you can say and what you can't say and stuff. And that often you're looking at family history. And so I would often, you kind of get a feeling for someone who's sitting like they're on the edge of a lot of stress most of the time and they don't have particularly good coping strategies how to manage it. And so I would often explore that about them, how they manage stress, what's going on in their lives, etc. And then often then you'd say, tell me about your parents. What was your family history of your parents? And so I'd suddenly hear, yeah, dad was a stress bunny. He had a heart attack at this age. He was always, quite a hot headed person and sort of quite reactive and didn't really know what to do with it. And so, and then there was this sort of classic history of cardiology, cardiac instability and so that it would really manifest in that way. And then I would also and then I'd see this massive theme with anyone with respiratory disease was that they were, I used to call them worry warts. I'd still call them worry warts actually, but there was that sort of underlying quite anxious people, and that would sort of manifest in that in the respiratory aspect of them. So it's quite a familiar thing, often when I used to work with people who were struggling to get off ventilators when I was working in critical care, um, or we were trying to prevent putting them onto a ventilator, it was always about the fact that I would have to establish that I can't breathe for you unless I put you on a machine, which we really don't want to do, but I can help you to gain that control and actually calm your nervous system so that you can so that you can slow and expand the way that you're breathing so that the medications can do what they need to do, etc. So it's just been such an extraordinary uh, awareness that I've gathered over the years. It was something very early on that I could see just familiarities and um, the 6 week retirement story of people coming in and you were clerking them in for their admission and they would say, oh well, I retired 6 weeks ago and I've noticed I've lost a bit of weight or I'm a little bit more tired and I thought I would be
Mhm.
feeling better than I did, and they just haven't figured that this is what's been going on for quite some time. So yeah, it's a huge it's a huge component, I think, of everything that's going on. We're not a physical being as such. We're an everything being. We're a psychological, we're an emotional,
Mhm.
we're a spiritual, we're a community, social being. There's all of these different aspects. And when one thing is out of alignment, it so often infiltrates and it affects everything else that's going on for us. So uh
It's just overwhelming, like the connections that I saw with the emotional piece in health, right?
mm,
It's just the similarities over the years in how people present, and like you said, the anxiety, right?
mm,
And the not the inability to self-regulate, with the people, especially the cardiologists, the patients, I mean the cardiology patients where um they didn't know how to control that anger, and they would go from 0 to 10, and
mm,
even trying to manage it in that environment where they know they have to behave because they're here for help. It was very
yeah.
difficult. They were very short to temper, and like you said, there is usually that family genetics, right? But it's interesting because a lot of we can see that it's a whole piece, but there's a lot of people on threads and Instagram and stuff, and a lot of them, you have so many people that aren't really in the profession at all. Like they're not in health, like they're, self studies. Like you have chiropractors giving, who's studying nutrition independently on their own, and they're giving advice on diets and keto, one of, so it's just bizarre. And then someone had said something on threads, and the depression and everything, and I said it stems from digestive issues,
mm,
and it does, right?
hmm
Digestive issues is a large part of depression, anxiety, mood disorders, right? Because a lot of people don't understand the thyroid axis. People talk about the gut brain, its
mm,
connection to the heart, but it's linked to everything in your body. So people get lost in that, and they don't realize that it is controlling a lot of those hormones that are being signaled, right? And it
mm,
is working close with thyroid, so it is largely impacting your mood. So um a social worker, got all in the conversation, and she was, oh, it's this, it's this, it's this, because she wanted, I guess, to portray herself as some kind of expert, but um they don't really study the body, you know what I mean?
mm,
So she said, I've been working as, she's a social worker, but she said a therapist, and for 45 years. And I said, I've been working in the body for 40 years. And she goes, but it's environment, it's this, it's that. I said, but it starts here, you know what I mean? So if I said, and I went through the whole thing about, in a very nice way, because I wasn't, and she was just very rude. And I said to her, when you develop an open mind, we'll have perhaps we'll have this conversation. But I was
mm,
explaining to her how that the digestive system actually forms in the birth canal, right? And
Yes.
your first breath, you are forming that real brain and it's sending
Yeah.
messages to the rest of your body. And I said that it grows your entire life, and we're actually more organism than human. I said,
Mm.
so you're actually reacting from that human part of yourself, you know? But there's so many people that feel this need to be right or to be wrong instead of just expressing and having those conversations, and that will help people with that emotions and getting rid of that trauma. But when we live in a world, there's so many people that have suffered so many different kinds of trauma in their life, and we don't know what they are. We don't, you know what I mean? We don't know how they grew up, what impacts, what different environments they were in and stuff like that. So when we attack people instead of um, trying to have that conversation because they need to be right, we're not helping anybody, right? And this is the society we're in today, especially on these social media platforms. Everybody feels the need to be seen. They want that, like that 5 minutes, or they want that sale and they want that. And they're just putting stuff out there. A lot of it doesn't make any sense. It's like it has no basis in reality,
Yeah.
you know? Um, and, just it's bizarre and it's crazy because people are following this like it's God's law, and they're not really tuning in to self, and learning to control self and working out the issues that they're experiencing. Because when you get rid of a lot of that stuff, that when you do that inner work, a lot of those health issues kind of auto correct, you know. It's not the body attacking the body. It's like you're holding on to things and there's just no space. We gotta let it go, right? I was big on holding on to things and resentments and stuff like that. And I know what that's, it's my body, right? Those pains that all of a sudden I had none, right? As the more I
Mhm.
released, the more free my body became. So what would you tell people, not from a nurse, but like, is it like if someone came to you, maybe someone for your therapy practice, if someone came to you and told you that they've experienced a lot, or if you were dealing with someone and you knew it was trauma related just based on the conversations, you know, um, I don't imagine in your therapy practice that you don't do a head to toe assessment in a different
Mm.
way, because that's so much a part of who a nurse is, right? Um, I do it in my nutrition practice. I ask all those questions because it's going to lead me to what I need to do with them next, right? And I do those. You and I both know that so much comes out of that. Things that we
Mm.
weren't even planning on, roads we didn't even think we were going to go down on that assessment come up, right? And we're like, oh, this is a whole nother piece of the story. We gotta care plan the hell out of this and get this person some help, right? But what would you tell them in to like open that conversation with them about how this is relieving this, how this a lot of these other things are going to get better when we deal with this piece. How do you or do you not have that conversation? You just work on those pieces, because you and I know that as one piece, starts to heal, the rest starts to heal. The spiritual, when you feel better emotionally, you do feel connected to a higher sense. You do want a more spiritual life, right? Because you start to feel more worthy and all kinds. So they're very cyclical in life. So what do you think about that?
When I meet somebody for the first time, I'm not specifically thinking about that. I mean, I think holistically, I'm thinking about all of these things at the same time. But right in those sort of initial um, minutes, I guess, where you're really establishing, am I a safe person for this person they do like, do I feel like a safe person for them? So it's not about, because I can often just listening to somebody's story hear solutions myself. I can hear where they're stuck. I can hear where there's trauma, and I can hear where they're avoiding going down certain thought processes, etc. But I think initially for me, it's about being showing up in with like full presence so that they actually feel very safe, um, without judgment, without um, any assumptions or sort of preconceptions about what might be going on for them, and actually just leaving it open for them. I've had such extraordinary um, conversations with people that they have a sense that I am genuinely curious about what's going on with them. And sometimes it's as people are speaking, it's they'll just say one thing, or I'll notice something written in the notes. And it's like an opening, it's like a conversation that sort of gets you in into a into an area that perhaps might be where we're going with stuff. It's really hard. It feels like I'm being really fluffy because it's hard to. I'm thinking of specific
Well,
clients.
you lean in, you have that opening
Yeah,
and you lean
yeah,
in.
you
Tell
do.
me
Like, I mean,
more. Yeah, like you
I can
said
remember.
this. Tell me
I
more.
remember. I think I've had this conversation with you. May even have been on one of our podcasts, but I remember taking over a case. This was as a nurse, um, and I remember reading in this. I remember reading that this guy had um, been a prisoner of war, a veteran. I can't remember which country it was, and I wasn't going to have this guy for very long. We was actually preparing him to fly on a fixed wing plane to go to a very large centre to have coronary artery bypass surgery. And I'd had this experience of nursing someone many years ago in intensive care who had been a member of the SAS type military. And when he was coming off the sedation and the drugs that we used back in the late 90s, etc., were kind of opiates and benzodiazepines and stuff, and they really caused a lot of ICU psychosis for people coming down from it. And he'd worked out, and I had this conversation with him a lot later, that he'd worked out how he was going to take every single person out in the unit. He'd it was the little
Lovely.
spring in the pen, in the ballpoint pen, the stethoscope wire, the he'd seen something, a clip, a clip on the resus trolley, all these little things. But he'd gone in, he was looking at it from that he was trapped, he was in a very um almost like he was tortured, because I mean, of course, when you wake up in those situations with all the gubbins that we've had on you, especially if you've been there for a wee while, you do feel very incapacitated and trapped. So for him, it was he was trained to survive anything like this. So his brain immediately went to this space, and he felt terrible when he was cognitive and rational that he'd actually gone to that place of how do I get out of here alive, and who do I have to take out? And he'd worked out how he was going to get out of away from all of us. And I
Survival.
it was completely survival, because that was what he was a trained assassin, really, inevitably, in his role. And so when I had this experience with this guy many years later, I mean, more than a couple of decades later, I was reading this about him, and I thought to myself, I've worked in cardiothoracic ICU, so I know the level of impeachment that it has on someone. They've got staples, they've got drains, they've got all sorts of manner of technological stuff and monitoring on them, as well as pain and surgery and wounds and stuff. And so my brain thought, no one could have gone through this experience without having a level of PTSD. And um, so I said to him, I see that you're a veteran of whichever war it was, and that you were imprisoned at some stage. And he went, yes. And I said, I can't remember the exact words I used, but I explored it and said, this surgery is going to be quite invasive, and it may invoke some of those. frightening feelings that you've had. And I
Yes.
told him the story about this guy. And I said, I'm just inquiring because I really want to make sure that you are going to be supported with any psychological aspects that could happen here. And before I know it, this
And there's
guy,
no paper clips at the bedside.
it was the paperclip was on the bedside, but it was just really interesting. And so it eventuated that he really opened up because I had explored an aspect. I gave him an opening to really tap into it. And this man had had an eating disorder. He had had a violent relationship with his spouse. He'd had a drinking issue. He'd had massive psychological, I mean, very classic PTSD issues that he'd had that had um, you know, never been treated or even explored. He'd had he'd been a violent person in his relationship. He'd had a child that had taken their own life, and real awful stuff that had happened from that point onwards. I never expected this degree of stuff that came out of this conversation, and we were able to put in so many different components of psychological support for where he was going. And I remember, it was probably about 2 hours before the plane arrived to take him away, and I said to him, just before he left, just before the crew came in to get him, I said, "Look, I'm really sorry if I opened up Pandora's box today because I feel like I feel like this is one of those really big pivotal days." And he said, "I have waited 40 years for somebody to talk to me about the stuff that you opened up today." And I was
I
just
think that's amazing.
devastated, devastated.
Even listening to the story, but the fact that you took the time to ask him about a sensitive topic,
Yeah.
and I think that we're just trained to see that whole
Mm,
person in that way, like just like we see the family, the impacts that this surgery is going to have on this whole family, um, especially if it's a father, a breadwinner, or the patriarch of the family. Like we see all these things and we
yeah.
notice these, but the fact that you took the time to have that conversation with him and allowed him to really express that feeling, probably
Never.
nobody went down that. I mean, clearly he said 40 years he was waiting to have that conversation, and I find that sometimes even just restating what someone said and just saying, so you're saying that this was traumatic or that you didn't feel valued by your mom, we're just restating what they have already just said, lets them know that you're paying attention to what's important to them, and they get to have that voice
Mm,
and that space without reliving it, but feeling that they had that place at the, you know what I
mm.
mean? And I just think that not enough people give themselves that space. So
God, no.
I mean, even as nurses, we hold on to so much of other people's emotions. Like it's in our body when we leave every shift, right? And we always ask how other people are, but we never say, "Hey, are you okay?" We never do that check. Is this okay? We see a lot of people die. We see very traumatic things in happening in people's lives, but even to each other, we don't say, "Hey, at the end of the shift, are you okay?" Um, and I think we need to do more of that as not from a nurse perspective, but as people, as friends, as
Humans.
parents,
Yeah.
to ask people, "Hey, are you okay? I just want to check in with you today. Are you having a good day?" You know, Even at your place of employment, how's your
Mm.
day going?
Well,
You
because
know,
we've been raised, a lot of us, our age and younger too. Um, we've been raised with that keep calm and keep going. That sort of mantra that's been, and resilience and stoicism and extraordinary, and that's how we've survived so many things. But it comes at a cost, and you cannot move from high stress without having to take the time to decompress that. You just have to look at animals and the way that animals will physiologically um, force themselves to sort of rid themselves of that level of adrenaline and cortisone that has been going through a traumatic experience. We don't do that, and particularly I see this in healthcare, I'm seeing it in education, I'm seeing it in the social sector. I'm seeing it flipping well everywhere, actually. But we just move from one situation. I was having this conversation with on Friday with some senior leadership people in the health service about the fact that you cannot deal with this level of um, fragility and life or death or high stakes stress, and then expect to suddenly just go, right, how are you? And then we have to have some time to gain your composure and recalibrate your own nervous system,
Yeah.
because it's still haunting in the background. How many times have you been, you've stood there with a set of notes or whatever it is that you're doing, and then you're like, oh, hello, Mrs. Brown. You know that you've just had a code on that bed that we've now cleaned, and we've cleaned the bed area, and we've now moved somebody else into it, or what we're human beings that we should be allowed to feel what we're feeling, and we should be able to process what we've just experienced, but we should be able to calm it down before we have to move on to the next task. And that's what you're seeing. People are not being able to do that. They're not be able to sit there and go, wow, that was a lot. Um, that was a lot. And really reflect on how that feels for you, how that's impacting you, how it's, keeping you awake at night. Because often, you've had that deep sleep. It's those lighter sleeps where we then in our delta waves, we're tapping into those sort of episodic areas of our sleep cycles and stuff. We're going to bring up and dredge up all of this stuff that we haven't processed, or we haven't allowed ourselves to
Mm.
reflect on. What would I have done differently? What worked? What didn't work? What I learned from this? This was a horrible situation to be in, not just in health, but in everything. And so I don't think we are not being particularly, we're trained to work in that serving and helping other people, but it does come at the detriment of ourselves if we don't work through that same system ourselves. And I
I
think we
know.
have to.
I,
I
I
mean,
agree with you.
we're hemorrhaging people out of services, the burnout and the moral injury and you know, I've thought, how many times have we seen people that will retire, and then before you know it, they've got a terminal illness. We have to do something. We have to do this better. It's so unhealthy the way that we are doing life in this
And
respect.
everybody's on all the time. Nobody really shuts down their
Yeah, there's no
system.
dimmer
And
switch. It's
no, and people just don't really know how to control that nervous system. They really don't. I know that when I was on the front lines, they had a room that we could go to, and just spend that 5 minutes, calm down, or they did have
mm,
it. And I know because of some of the situations that we experienced that it was necessary. Um, Towards the end when we or at time there, they fed us, they made sure we ate.
mm,
The community all came together, but I know towards the end they started doing like sending people in um that did meditation and
mm.
breath like calming techniques and stuff with us towards the end. In the beginning it was way too busy. But
But
yeah.
that always comes down to resources and thinking outside the box, and actually finances as well. And a lot of these, like in your country, a lot of it's run on that private sector. Of course, I've always worked in publicly funded sectors, and there's resources and money and investing in. You have to invest in your workforce because
Yeah, you
I
really,
mean, we're
it's
looking at
so
an
important.
aging workforce, and here in New Zealand, we've got staff just leaving for um, better money situations overseas. But it's not just the money; it's the fact that they're not getting seen and valued for what they give. They're not getting that rest and digest time. we're just constantly running on adrenaline, on steam, and you can only sustain that for so long before people start voting with their feet. They start leaving those industries, and then you end up with uh, we're not going to have a workforce to look after people.
100%. So it's funny you said the rest and digest because
Yeah, same
I
as
I'm
the gut.
I made a
Sleep.
story post with me sitting in a swing in midair eating spaghetti, relaxed.
Love it.
So I made a post and across it says,
Mm.
"Don't forget to rest and digest." But above me, there's like a camera, like I'm watching you. So
Yeah.
I thought it was cute. I have a lot of fun creating these things, but I think it. I think we've hit a wall
Mm.
in careers, in relationships, in community, in the environment did a long time ago, where we're at that stage where we have to start acting together because it doesn't get better with one person having an idea. It
No.
needs to be a community effort to say, like the foods, some of the foods, the things they're putting in the foods. We need to have more control over and regulate what we're eating. And for those who aren't able to regulate, like because there are people with eating disorders and stuff, then we have to make sure that there's healthier choices available. We have
Yeah.
to take that step in that direction, have more stability at work. If there's a stressed environment, they should have a place where they can go and take that 5 minutes, calm down, de-escalate whatever's going on. Or if it's just a really high pressure time, you can't expect somebody to sit, like, counting. I can only imagine, running those numbers all day could be really stressful, right? So I would think that they would need time away from that screen time, right? So there should be a place or even headphones that actually calm you down. Like I actually have a pair that has music and it gives you like a little head massage. I got it for myself one Christmas and yeah, I'm just looking at it over there saying, when was the last time you put that? When was the last time you put that on? Not when I'm thinking maybe I should. So, but something like that to because employees and people in general that feel valued are going to put a better effort forward, right? It's like the employee who's always doing their best job. They always show up early. They always leave late. They always do the things and no one ever says, "Hey, good job," right? It's only so long before that starts breaking down and they start saying, "Why am I doing this?" Nobody, you know what I mean? Um, so we do have to respect that, and we
Mm.
do have to start giving people that space. Even I did a show with my girlfriend the other day, and I was telling her that some people are so self-centered and so self-absorbed that
Yeah.
even conversations have become anything but. If you're in the middle of a conversation with someone say, "How you doing?" and you go to answer them and they're already on to something else, right? Because they
They
don't
haven't
have the
listened.
focus. They don't have the focus. They have that other internal noise going on and they can't sit still and have a give and take conversation. There's more argument, they're more argumentative than conversational, right? Like, because
Yeah,
people
it's
have
like
this need to be right.
it's like they're consuming space. They're overconsumption. They're having to dominate that space. Um they've got to overconsume the quiet around them. They have to fill it all with themselves, and they're listening. If somebody else says something, they're not listening to um they're listening to respond. They're not listening to understand. They're not being fully present, because and you can see that when you're talking to people, and how many times do you have a conversation with somebody and you say something that, "Oh, hey, what's going on with you?" No, I have a brain that does this all the time. It just fires up 12 different tabs in my brain every time someone starts speaking. I think, "Oh, I've got an example of this. Oh, I remember this, and I read this one time." And none of that's necessary, because that's my brain finding examples where I'm familiar with what they're talking about, so it lands better. Doesn't mean I need to share my stuff for that person, because that person's actually just sharing a vulnerable piece of information about them, or they're just needing someone to hear them. They just need to be seen, or feel like they're, you know, um, valued, etc. Um, but you see this overconsumption and over dominating of that space. We are. I know that you understand this fully. We are so connected. So much of our conversations are a mirror of what's going on inside of us as well. So somebody will say something, um, and it is in part you're learning something about yourself in that story of that thing that that person's saying, and it may not happen immediately, but the fact that 12 tabs opened on your brain and you've gone, oh, I've got this example, there's some stuff that you need to process, there's some stuff for you to reflect in there as well. What is there any garbage in there that I still haven't taken out the trash, um
That's
we
your
don't
body
generally
saying,
do that, do we?
but
We
that's
we
you. I'm
just go,
sorry.
oh,
I didn't mean to
yeah,
interrupt.
we yeah,
But
it's
that's your brain telling you, it's your body saying, "Hey, you
here
got
it
to take
is.
care of this. Here it is." Oops, there it
Yeah.
is.
Oh,
So,
look, you've just put a mirror up and now I know where I've got to go. Oh,
yeah,
that's right. I have still haven't figured that out yet.
exactly. But we had this whole conversation about this, and she felt like it's boundaries. She like it's more boundaries
Mm,
that you have to set boundaries, and I agree with that. And I was telling her there was somebody at work, that just walks away in the middle of a conversation with everybody all the time, you know, and but you know, she said, well, that's boundaries. I would let them know, hey, is something wrong with you today because you did this, and I felt like that was disrespectful. But um, there are some psychological issues and probably some learning difficulties with this person, even though they're an adult, and like maybe high functioning Asperger's or something. Um, so we kind of all let it go because
mm,
if we tried to explain it to her, she would not sit around long enough to listen, number one. And number two, it would like fall on deaf ears, so
mm.
we just, but
It might be their knee-jerk flight reaction to a stress, like they're having an activation on their nervous system, and it may be that maybe that it's boring to their brain because it's not engaging enough for them. But it also could be that there's something stressful. So their natural knee jerk is to just leg it, to sort of
it's
walk away. Hard
I
to be on the
really
receiving end of that.
I really just don't even think she's aware of it. And
Mm,
she's harmless. She really is. I mean, somebody was giving a speech and she just got up and started talking, like walked up to the mic like it was her turn. They weren't done. She just, she just like, okay, I've had enough of this. Let me go
oh
share
my
mine.
goodness.
And
It's quite childlike, actually, isn't it?
but yeah, so and you got to see that for what it is, and
Mm,
you got to know your audience, and like even people that like come to you for help and they say they want help, right? And they say, oh no, that's not the problem,
mm,
and they keep saying, oh no, that's not the problem because they're not ready to look at it.
mm,
Then you're not going to work on that problem. You're going to start over here. Okay, you feel like this is the problem, and you're going to work them back to what the problem really is. Because a lot of times people come to you with the problem, and it's really not actually the problem. And you and I both know that, right? But we have to unpack that. Um, Team Classy also used to do this thing, seven, seven, seven levels down, like
layers.
seven, yeah.
Yeah, that's a
Se-
Tony Robbins
Yeah, well, they work
seven
together.
layers down.
I was
Yeah,
in
yeah. It's
something
a
with them,
really
and
powerful.
yeah, and they 7 levels deep or something like that, and they let us
Mm,
use it, and
mm,
um, they had told us that we could use it as our own. I always give them credit for it because I think it's brilliant, and I've used that with a few
Mm.
experiences that I've had with clients, so they could see the real thing for themselves, have that little aha moment, and even for myself when I thought I was having a problem with something specific. Um, I like wrap myself out like, come on, that's not the real thing. Let's get to the real thing, you know. Um, if I keep repeating a same behavior that I know might not necessarily bring me good outcomes, you know. So yeah, so things like that um only work with people who are ready, right?
Yeah, because you don't want to re-traumatize people, and they're only really going to go as deep as they want to when they're
Yeah,
ready.
7 levels
Um,
deep. That's it.
it's really uh, I see I don't really like the superficial stuff because they're all symptoms of something that's going on much deeper, but they're not gonna uh you can't force somebody to do that work if they're not ready, because you've got to want them to. I know we've had this discussion about, teaching someone to fish, but they've got to want to fish. And if they don't want to fish, why don't they want to fish? What's the actual reason why they don't want to learn how to
Yeah.
fish? It's been. I was having this conversation just a couple of hours ago. I was walking through the park with my dog, and I meet up with a nurse that works in primary health, and so we we offload all our crazy things in the world, and she was talking about that she'd had a really crazy week of people just, not taking responsibility and not being accountable for this, that, and the other, because they really wanted just a superficial fix for a minute piece of the puzzle that they wanted. They couldn't manage this. It kind of gone out of their realm of coping. So they wanted to do that. And I said to her that it's the same as everything. You have to own it, accept it, work with it, take responsibility for it, be accountable. And not everybody's going to be ready to do that. Um, they're generally the people I don't want to work with, because I like to do the ones that want to go deeper, because I think that's when I do my most powerful work, because I'm not afraid to have those conversations
Mhm.
and those uncomfortable moments. And I'm able to work with somebody who is becoming highly elevated, and they're really tapping into that stuff. I think that's just a part of me that I prefer to go to the root issue as opposed to deal with the symptoms of it.
I
It's
agree with
just,
you. I agree with you
but
100%.
not
And
everybody's ready, and it takes time. Sometimes for
I
people,
will.
it takes a lot of time to get down to it. Sometimes even years.
Well,
Yeah.
luckily, I didn't. I have never gotten to that point where a client where it took years.
No.
But in nursing,
Yeah.
you see those
But then you
repeat
can.
offenders. But I had a client for like 2 months who was just talking about that superficial stuff, and um, I said to her, you're basically paying me to like have these conversations with you, and I think there's so much more, and um, but I had to ask her because I was perplexed. She wasn't getting the results. She wasn't doing the work, and on paper she was doing everything right, but something was off. And we're like those investigative reporters, nurses, right? And I was like, this ain't right. Something's not right. I need to put a stop to this.
Mm,
And I told her we're gonna have to open Pandora's box just a little bit. Otherwise
mm.
we're wasting our time here. You know what I mean?
They just
Um,
shop for more. They just
yeah.
shop and go for. They're just shopping. That when I say years, that's, I mean, they've shopped from one therapist to another person to another person to
But I
another
didn't
program
want
to
her
another
going to
workshop.
somebody else
No.
because I kind of knew the problem, like
Mm,
that it wasn't going to be a quick fix, and it was more than one problem I was looking at just based on the conversations, right?
mm,
So I'm very good at getting people to open up and talk about stuff, but I'm also good at seeing when it's talking about the superficial bullshit because I did that myself for years. I didn't want to talk
Masking.
about the fear. Yeah. I
Mm.
mean, so I can point myself out and other people very easily, but, um, and I can identify with why they're doing it, but I know it's not healthy. So, um, and,
But
it's
that
so,
makes you such that makes you the right person in the room to be able to have those conversations because you can sense what they're doing because you've had that lived experience. And I think that's what makes a lot of what we do so much more real because we do know, we do understand, we've been there. And I think people we're gonna make much more of an impact when we are in that position. I think you were talking before about people that have only sort of scratching the surface on one aspect of the wellness spectrum, and it's huge. But when you've come from a place of real knowing and deep experience, that lived experience, um, you're much more comfortable to do it because you've done that work yourself, and you're actually a really good person to help that person because you've had that experience yourself. There's no holds barred. They're not going to shock you by anything they say, and they know that. They can feel that. And you are going to be my safe person. I can
but
do this
some,
because you've had this life.
but
You've had
sometimes it
this
gets their
experience.
back up against the wall too. Like they're afraid to
But
share.
that's
Like
their
she
projection.
knows
That's
my
their
shit.
well, but
Uh
it's
oh.
because because the brain is trying to keep them safe, and safeness for them is avoiding doing something that is feel they think is going to be harmful and very hurtful, but actually it's going to be exactly the thing that they need to do. Um, so that resistance is just that natural self-defense mechanism, whoop, we're going there. Oh my God, and that projection and deflection thing.
But like even in the online space, like I see so many like copy paste and phonies, and you know, like you could see it in some of them just don't even care that you know it. People, well, they don't care, because they're getting clients by telling lies and not fulfilling any of those outcomes. But and they're happy about that, right? I don't know. I we have a failure to do no harm, and I think that we're morally stable human beings. Most nurses are
Mm,
morally stable,
mm,
and it's not even just like that. Like ChatGPT, you has a brain when he's talking about certain parts of the body and stuff, and and it's specific to ChatGPT, and you see it on so many people's posts, and and now you now know that that whole post there is not even them talking, right?
yeah.
Um, so for me, someone who's looking at that, even if it's someone that I like, it kind of makes me lose like they don't have any authority anymore, because even if they're in that realm, well, because if this is what you do, I want to hear your lived experience. So if
But
you
that's
really,
influencer world, though. That's influencer
yeah,
world.
but
That's a
it's
very
not,
different kettle of
it's
fish.
bullshit. Yeah, but it's
And
bullshit.
it's awful. It's horrible. It's superficial and it's fake. It's
This guy that I
unhealthy. It's
was telling you,
unhelpful. It's
telling
dangerous.
but this guy that I was telling you about, um that doctor, he's a chiropractor, and he's writing doctor, right? So, on his thing. So everybody thinks he's like, an internist or a GP, and he's writing doctor on his thing. But it's so clear to me that based on some of the medical advice that he's giving out there, that he's not a doctor, because some of it is so harmful. So I asked him, what kind of doctor are you exactly? Because I said, I want to know,
Mm.
and someone said that he's a brilliant chiropractor who does a lot of independent study. Now this guy has something like 77 million followers.
Wow.
And then I say to myself, well, do I still need to guess why the world is having such bad time with health? Because these are the kind of things they're listening to. He's blaming SIBO on over fermentation because you're not eating enough meat. I said, Really? Is that what causes it? You're not eating enough of your keto diet, right? Your diet requirements. So, and people are using that to sell it, and I can't believe, you know, people are generally smart people. I mean, you have people that are school smart and educated, but the people that even don't go to school and educate themselves scholastically, they have basic common sense. And I can't see that people can't, I can't understand how they can't see through that, because it's not, I'm giving you advice. It's like, here's two bits of advice, not the full story, and this is how you can get the rest. Pay here, right? So
That's where
it's
you
pay.
use your discernment. That's where you have to use your discernment. If something I'm reading is causing me to feel stressed or fearful or angry, I'm having an emotional reaction to it. It's that there's or there's something that I need to. This is only a little piece of it. I have to buy this to do this, that, and the other. I know that's marketing. I know that's how people make their business work. But if that's what they're doing, that's where you have to use your discernment to be able to do that. Not everybody's, you know that, Andrea. We're not everybody's on that same playing field,
It's just
really.
sad because I've
It
seen
is.
there's so much, there's a real trust issue online, and social media is not social anymore. It's not. It's become a
It's
big sales
fleecing.
place.
It's fleecing media.
Oh my God, like somebody somebody sent me a message the other day and said, "Hey Andra, I'm just circling back. How you doing? I hope everything's all right in your world." And I'm like, "Circling back? There's no prior messages. Who is this chick?"
Yeah, I know.
Like we were old time friends. And then she got to the point. And I was
Yeah.
like, "Yeah, right.
When I first started out in this biz, three or so years ago, sort of privately, and sort of doing some private stuff, there was this you go into all these forums and you get bombarded with, I've got this, I've got that, etc. And there was somebody that had contacted me. I forget, I can't even remember what industry or what aspect of the wellness she was coaching or doing for. And I was like, thank you, but no, thank you. Anyway, it was a long time later, maybe 6 months later, this person just randomly messaged me again and said, oh, hello, just checking in again. You need to have a shop or you need to do this, that, and the other. And I'm not selling a product. So I was like, oh, that's not really where I'm at. And thank you, but no, thank you. And then she said, she came back with a message. Okay, understood loud and clear. This is like now the third time I've said this to this person. But can you tell your friends about me? And I said, not at the moment. I'm very busy. I'm really sorry. I can't help you with this situation. I was very polite. And so she then sent me a message. I won't say all the expletives that she used, but she swore at me, called me an old bitch or something like that, and then blocked me. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is crazy behavior for someone that's clearly cold calling and trying to do this. And I was kind, I was reassuring, but it was just not what I was into. But the abuse that I got was unbelievable. It
Yeah,
was,
listen, this is a true story. Someone reached out to me or something. Somebody invited me to a group, and um it was holistic, right? Um, and I didn't want to join that group because I know that when I hear people say things that I'm going to give my opinion, and I said, really don't want to do that, right? But then I read, it's more about people supporting people and stuff like that in a holistic way, right? So she asked the group, hey, I announced that I was giving away these free one-to-one sessions, and this it would really help me if you tell me why you didn't purchase them. Like, do you not understand what coaching is, or blah 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 blah, right? But I found that insulting to the people that were in the
mm,
group, especially being there were a lot of coaches in there that I personally knew, and I was like, "What is she talking about?" Yeah, I want more information. So I thought that was a little insulting, but it made her also look desperate, and she's very good at what she does, right? Like, you're badgering people, how come you didn't buy my thing? So, and I said maybe people don't really need what you're offering right now, and they just wanted to support you, right?
Mm.
She
Mm.
called me into a side chat like I was a 3-year-old and so telling me like, um, I would never go to your group and tell people you didn't, I said, you could say whatever you want in my group. I said, because it's a group. It's, I don't tell people what to say in my groups. I said, because then they wouldn't be showing up as themselves. I said, so are you
No.
suggesting that if every time I say something, if you don't like it, we're going to have a side chat? Because I don't have time for that to support you. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Right? Um, but and I know that was her own insecurities and stuff. I said to her, I said, I said, from an outside perspective, it looked like you were badgering people because they didn't buy your thing. And I said,
Mm.
there are a lot of, and she goes, there's not a lot of coaches in my group. I said, actually, there are. I said, the person that invited me was a coach, right? I said, I'm a consultant. I said, and several of other consultants are in there because there's a lot of nurses and health people in
Mm.
there, right?
Mm.
She was just so that didn't fare well, but that didn't fare
Oh,
well. But
there's some shark infested waters out there, that's for sure.
I mean, come on, I didn't say that, but and I said to her, I said there are a lot of people in groups that don't buy things. I said I have people that are in my group for 3 years that never
Mm.
bought anything, and all of a sudden bought something.
When the
I
time
said
was
you
right.
I said you can't tell that. I said, you might say something one day that just they have that aha moment. I said I didn't mean it like that. I was letting you know that I'm here to support you
Mm.
because I certainly don't need what you're doing. My life is because she helps people, complete tasks or do whatever they want to do. I don't have anything standing in my way. If I want to do something, I do it. You know what I mean? So
It's the last
I
thing you
wouldn't
need.
need, so, but I felt bad afterwards. Like, because
Very
I
one-sided.
always reflect, but I always reflect on when I say in conversations that I have, could I have said it a different way that might not have made her feel like attacked, but I didn't. When I analyzed it, I was like, what? But I didn't attack her. I was just making a statement. I'm here to support you. Um, And I said that. I said, or people could just be here because want to support you and love your vibe, like me. And I was telling her like I love your vibe. So how did you get from that to
They
you
only
know?
want some people only hear what they want to hear though.
But
They're only going to hear what they
then she blocked me. I was
Uh,
like,
you
okay,
dodged a bullet,
you
I
came to
think.
friend me. I didn't. I wasn't looking.
Mm. Oh,
Um,
this takes all sorts.
But I mean, but you have to. We've gotten to a place where everything's like eggshells, and that's not where
Mm.
healing happens. Where you have
No.
to monitor every conversation because
Mm.
it doesn't matter. You could say, "Hey, you look great today," and somebody will turn around and say, "What do you mean I look great today?" They'll find
What are you saying? Did I
that.
not look good yesterday?
I know, but it's like people twisted what you're saying, and I'm like,
But
whoa.
that's a real classic example of people that are not okay with managing themselves and their stress systems and their nervous systems because they're ready for action at all times. They're braced for impact at all times in
I
every
know.
situation. You
I
know,
know.
uh, yesterday I was standing, I had to go to the doctor's and I'm in reception and I heard the gentleman in front of me or to the side of me, seeing another receptionist, was complaining that every time he goes to the doctor's, I have to see a different doctor and he was ranting. I only saw caught half of it, and I was like, "And this is why you're here for blood pressure problems, sir." I'm standing behind him, thinking to myself, "You're not managing the stress of the situation. That we are managing the best that we can with the limited doctors that we have in this industry, and blah blah blah." And this is why you're here. This is why you're unwell. Oh, it's so funny. But anyway,
I
yeah.
remember one time going to a doctor and um I don't know what happened, but he was really backed up. And
Sounds like you need a laxative.
But he had canceled. He had canceled the appointment the day before. Now, if you cancel your appointment, they still bill you. That's used to be the
Mm.
thing with this particular doctor. So, I'm waiting there for like 2 hours in the waiting room, and I had a scheduled appointment. So I filled out a bill and I handed it to the receptionist. She said to me, "What is this?" Like all panicked. I said, "Well, your doctor has a cancellation policy." I said, "So do I." I said, and he didn't
Genius.
make, I said, he didn't make his appointment
Oh,
yesterday. And I've been
within the
sitting in this
24 hours.
waiting room for 2 hours. I said, so that's my bill for the last 26 hours. And then, let me get him. Let me get him. You see how fast I got into that office, and I told him, listen, oh, he's just having this thing. Don't worry, we're gonna take care of this. But I was sitting there forever, and I understand things that happen, but I could find the humor in it. I said, well, I'll fix his ass, right? But
They'll remember that forever.
but she laughed, and
Yeah.
that was probably just what she needed to break that ice
Yeah.
that day,
Yeah.
because
And and
they all look so stressed out of their
and it,
mind.
stuff happens all the time. Oh man, that's funny. You crack me up.
But you should have seen the look on her face when I said, "Do you want to pay now?" I'll never forget the look on
That's
her face.
priceless. We all
But
need
we
that.
we have to let the audience go because listen, when I get together with Miss Nicky Cooper, I could talk to her forever, and I know that these shows really can't go on forever. So we're gonna
Oh,
let you guys go, and
oh,
we'll come in with
oh.
another fabulous topic with some more insights into how we're feeling. We're always interested in hearing what your beliefs are. We don't get upset. We like you to have an opinion and we would love to hear from you. If there's something that you'd like to hear us discuss, we'd love to accommodate. So by all means, you could always comment below, like and subscribe to hear more. So thanks for checking in with Nicky Cooper and Andra Annette on Echoes for Destiny. Have a great day.